My name is Judith Callahan. I'm 59 years old, and last winter I buried the man I thought I'd grow old with. Daniel and I were married for 33 years, and in the quiet after his heart gave out, it felt like the world had turned down its volume and left me standing in silence. Our home in Eugene had too many memories, too many rooms that still whispered his name. I couldn't bear the echo of empty chairs or the hum of the dishwasher he used to load just so. So when my daughter Ashley suggested I come stay with her and Derek in Portland, it felt like a soft place to land. I told myself it would only be for a little while, just until I could catch my breath. Ashley said it was no trouble that they'd make space. I packed up what I needed, a few clothes, some photos, a favorite teacup, and left the house Daniel and I built with our hands and years. Their apartment wasn't big, but it had warm lighting and hardwood floors. And for a moment, I believed this could work. I was grateful, really. Grateful not to be alone, grateful to have somewhere to put my grief that wasn't a motel or an echoing kitchen. I stayed in the guest room, the one tucked at the back of the hall, just wide enough for a twin bed and a chair. I kept the door closed most of the time. I didn't want to intrude, didn't want to be the kind of mother-in-law that needed managing. Every morning I made coffee before they woke. I'd fold laundry before they noticed it was even in the basket. I cooked dinner, always making sure it was something they liked. I told myself that helping was my way of staying useful, of staying welcome. Ashley worked long hours at the hospital and came home looking exhausted. I tried not to ask too many questions. Sometimes she'd sit with me for a bit, scrolling through her phone, half smiling, when I told her about a book I'd read. Derek was polite at first. He said thank you when I cooked, nodded when I passed him in the hall. But there was a distance in him that I couldn't name at the time, something that felt like it was waiting to harden into something worse. Still, I held on to the idea that family meant showing up, especially when it was hard. I had given everything I had to the life Daniel and I built to raising Ashley with all the love I could manage. It never occurred to me that I might outlive the use of that love. There were nights I'd sit in that little guest room with my tea and wonder how much space I really took up. I told myself this was temporary, that soon I'd figure out what came next. That grief didn't mean I was broken, just paused. But deep down in the softest part of me, I was afraid. Not of being alone exactly, but of being gently forgotten. At first I thought I was imagining it. Derek stopped saying good morning. If I passed him in the hall, he'd barely nod sometimes, not at all. He used to sit down for dinner when I cooked. I made his favorite chicken piccata once, and he took one bite, got up, and made himself a sandwich. I told myself he was just having a bad day. But it happened again, and again. One evening, I was watching an old movie. I loved something Daniel and I used to quote to each other. Derek came in, sat down, picked up the remote, and flipped to sports without a word. I didn't say anything. I just stood up and went to my room. The walls in that apartment weren't thick, and that night I heard him mutter to Ashley something that sounded like, "How long is this supposed to last?" I tried to tell myself I'd misheard, that the sound of the dishwasher had distorted it. But the ache in my chest said otherwise. I wasn't wanted there. I was tolerated. Ashley was harder to read. She came home late, quickly scrolled her phone, and disappeared into their bedroom. When I brought up little things like how quiet Derek had been lately, she just sighed and said work was draining her, that Derek was stressed too. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that all of this could be solved with time and patience. But there was something in the air that felt permanent, like a shift that had already happened while I was too busy trying to hold on. I started doing things later in the evening to avoid being seen. Laundry after 10. Dishes at midnight. I skipped meals and pretended I wasn't hungry. I wanted to take up less space, make myself invisible enough that maybe things would reset. Sometimes Derek would leave cabinets open after taking something out. I'd close them quietly behind him. I cleaned up crumbs from counters he didn't wipe. I noticed Ashley started locking the cabinet where they kept wine, even though I never touched a drop. The guest room, once a place to rest, started feeling more like a closet I was hiding in. My suitcase stayed half-packed. I think a part of me knew I might have to leave again soon. Not because they said it, but because they didn't have to. There was a night when Ashley came home and sat on the couch, her face pale, shoulders slumped. I brought her a cup of tea and asked if she was okay. She took the tea but didn't answer. When I asked again, she just said she had too much on her plate and needed space. I went back to my room and stared at the walls. There was a family photo of us on the nightstand, the three of us at a beach when Ashley was 8. I remember how she used to reach for my hand every time a wave came in. She doesn't reach for me now. A few nights later, I overheard Derek on the phone with someone, maybe a friend or a colleague. He laughed and said something like, "I've got a roommate who doesn't pay rent and thinks she's helping by folding towels wrong." I froze in the hallway, every word tightening around me like a rope. I waited until the call ended, then went into the kitchen and refolded every towel in the drawer one by one. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove something, or maybe I just needed to do something with my hands so I wouldn't fall apart. The silence between us grew heavier. Ashley stopped asking how I was sleeping. Derek stopped even pretending to smile. I felt like a misplaced object, something no one had the nerve to throw out, but also no one wanted to see. When I finally asked Ashley, really asked her if something had changed, she just stared at her phone and said, "You're reading too much into things." Then she got up and left the room. She didn't look back. That was the moment I stopped hoping it would get better. Not because of what she said, but because of how easily she said it. Like my worry, my feelings, my place there didn't carry any weight. So I went back to the guest room. I shut the door, lay down, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just tired of waiting to be wanted. Dinner was pot roast. I had spent most of the afternoon on it, making sure it came out just right. Daniel used to say I could make a roast that tasted like home. I guess I was hoping to bring some of that comfort into the room. Ashley was distracted. Her phone sat on the table next to her plate screen, lighting up every few minutes. Derek poured himself a beer and didn't even glance at the food. We ate in silence, just the clink of forks and the hum of the refrigerator. Then, out of nowhere, Derek spoke. He didn't raise his voice. That almost made it worse. He just looked up and said it. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." Ashley didn't say anything. She didn't look at me. Her hands were in her lap. I turned to her, hoping, praying for something soft to land on. She kept her eyes down and said maybe it was best if I started thinking about finding something more stable, for everyone's sake. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands felt hollow. My chest felt like it had forgotten how to hold air. I stood up slowly, took my plate to the sink, and washed it without a word. Then I walked down the hall to the guest room and closed the door behind me. The tears didn't come right away. It was something colder than crying. I opened my suitcase and started folding clothes, not even caring if they were neat. I packed in silence, not because I was strong, but because I was already gone. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I didn't write a note. I didn't knock on their door to say goodbye. I zipped the suitcase, lifted it off the bed, and walked out into the night like a woman who had just misplaced the last piece of her life. It was colder than I expected. Portland wind always cuts a little deeper at night. I walked 4 blocks to the main road and stood under the flickering sign of a diner until a cab finally pulled up. The driver didn't ask questions. He took me to a motel near the edge of town. It was the kind of place people passed without seeing. The office smelled like mildew. The vending machine outside blinked with a half-broken light. I handed over what cash I had and got a room key without looking the clerk in the eye. The room smelled like dust and old carpet. The comforter had a pattern that used to be flowers. I dropped my bags and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where the wall met the floor. I stayed there for hours. It wasn't sadness, not really. It was something deeper. Like I had become invisible even to myself. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a thought that lasted more than a minute. The silence pressed in thicker than air. I didn't call Ashley. I didn't expect her to call me. What would she even say? That she hoped I found somewhere warmer, that I was overreacting, that Derek had a point. I sent her a message the next morning, just one line. "I understand. I love you always." She didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next. I started walking to nearby businesses, asking about part-time work. Anything that didn't require lifting or moving too quickly. No one called back. I looked in mirrors and barely recognized myself. I kept thinking about the pot roast, about the moment Derek said I wasn't their charity case, about how Ashley didn't say a word in my defense, not one. At night, the motel made strange noises, pipes knocking doors, slamming, strangers yelling down the hall. I kept a chair propped under the door handle, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. I slept in my clothes. I kept my suitcase packed. I didn't know where I'd go next. Every part of me felt used up, like grief had taken everything Daniel didn't, and now there was nothing left but skin and silence. I had given my whole life to my family, to building a home, to loving people who didn't know how to love me back. And now I was sitting in a motel off the freeway, wondering how many days I had left before the money ran out. I tried to pray once, but the words didn't come. I tried to write, but my hand shook too much to hold the pen steady. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the paint. 1, 2, 3. I told myself it would be okay, that I had been through worse, that I would figure it out, but I didn't believe it. Not really. That night changed everything, not just because of what they said, but because of what I saw. I saw who they were, and I saw that I didn't matter enough to them to even be told with kindness. I was a burden they finally got tired of carrying. I don't remember packing it. The box was one of the last I had grabbed before leaving Ashley's. Mostly photos, a worn recipe book, a pair of reading glasses I never used. It had been sitting in the corner of the motel room for weeks unopened. I finally reached for it one night when the silence got too thick. My hands were cold, my chest heavier than usual. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just something to remind me I used to belong somewhere. Near the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, was a small leather-bound book. I held it like it might fall apart. The cover was cracked edges, soft from time. My breath caught when I opened it and saw the handwriting. It was my mother's, the same careful loops she used on birthday cards and grocery lists. Somehow elegant, even in old ink. I stared at the first page, unsure if I wanted to keep going. The early entries were harmless. Notes about garden vegetables, a complaint about the price of eggs, mentions of rainy days, and Sunday sermons. I almost closed it, but something made me turn another page. That's when I saw the name, not a full name, just an initial. He came again today. He said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. I read it twice, then again. My hands started to tremble. She wrote that he had a family, that he had a name to protect. Then scrawled along the edge of one page, almost as if it was never meant to be seen, were the words that stilled me completely. Judith must never know. I didn't blink. I couldn't. Those 4 words folded the air around me, my name, in her voice, in her handwriting, in the space where secrets lived. I flipped back, searching for context. I turned forward, hoping it was just a passing sentence. But the diary felt suddenly fragile, as if each page held something waiting to come loose. The words kept echoing. Judith must never know. What was I never supposed to find out? What truth had been hidden inside that soft handwriting? My mother, who never raised her voice, had written something sharp enough to cut through years. That night I sat with the diary in my lap. The motel lamp flickered once, like it wasn't sure it should keep watching. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Something old and buried had shifted in me. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was remembering, or maybe I was beginning to see for the first time. I spent the next morning hunched over the diary like it was breathing. The entries grew darker, more cautious. She never used his full name, just H, or sometimes just him. She wrote about hotels, about cash in envelopes he insisted she take, about guilt, about loneliness. And over again she mentioned how he said he had arranged something for me, something I would have one day. She didn't say when, just that it would come through a lawyer. A name finally surfaced, Abraham Goldstein. Written carefully once, then scribbled again later, as if she wasn't sure whether to remember or forget. That name hit something in me. I had heard it before, buried somewhere in the corners of a holiday memory. My mother had mentioned him once, long ago, while talking about someone who helped when times were hard. I didn't want to call. I was too shaken, too unsure of what I was chasing. So I tore a page from a motel notepad, wrote down everything I could, my name, my mother's name, what I had found, and a question I didn't even know how to phrase. I mailed it from the corner drugstore. The clerk didn't ask what was in the envelope. I kept the receipt in my jacket pocket, folded and refolded until it felt like a charm. Then I waited. The days were slow and gray, the motel walls pressed in closer than before. I stared at the phone, half hoping, half dreading it would ring. It didn't. Not for 12 days. When it finally did, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, rereading the same diary page for the third time. I picked up the receiver with hands that weren't steady. The voice on the other end was old and clear. "This is Abraham Goldstein. Is this Judith Callahan?" I couldn't answer right away. My throat caught on silence. He waited, then said something that broke the air around me. "I always wondered if you'd reach out one day. There's something you need to see." I didn't ask what. I didn't ask how he knew. I just listened as he gave me an address in Seattle and said he would be waiting. The line went dead, but something in me had turned on. Not just hope, something older, something like truth coming up for air. The bus ride to Seattle felt longer than it should have. I watched trees pass like flickers of memory, too fast to hold on to. My suitcase rattled against the aisle seat, and I kept one hand on it like it might disappear. The address Mr. Goldstein gave me led to an old brick building with ivy creeping along the windows. His office smelled like paper and wood polish. The silence in the room felt settled, like it had been waiting for years. He didn't ask questions. He just walked to a cabinet and pulled out an envelope. It was sealed yellowed with age and had my full name on it, Judith Elaine Callahan, written in handwriting that wasn't my mother's. He handed it to me without a word. I sat down before I opened it. My hands shook so badly I had to pause before unfolding the letter. The first lines made my chest tighten. He wrote that he had met my mother when he was a younger man, that he had loved her but couldn't leave the life he had already built, that he never stopped thinking about me. He called me his daughter, not in a forced way, not in a legal way, but in a way that felt real even now. He wrote that he wished he had been braver, that he regretted every missed birthday, every graduation, every empty chair. He said he tried to give my mother what he could, quietly, carefully. Without disrupting the world he had to keep intact. He had made arrangements. If anything happened to him, Mr. Goldstein would know what to do. By the end of the letter, I was crying, not loud, just a quiet, steady stream that wouldn't stop. It wasn't grief, it wasn't joy. It was something else, like someone had finally turned a light on in a room I didn't know I'd been sitting in. Mr. Goldstein waited until I folded the letter again, then he handed me a folder. Inside were documents I didn't understand at first. Bank statements, deeds, a trust portfolio, a total circled in red ink. A little over $1 million. It didn't feel real. I looked at him hoping he'd explain it away, but he just nodded and said it had always been mine. He said Howard, my father, wanted me to have a foundation, not out of guilt but out of a quiet kind of love, the kind that couldn't be public but still tried to do right. I didn't know what to say. I had come into that office thinking maybe I'd leave with a few answers. Instead, I was leaving with a new name stitched into my life. Not just Judith the widow, not just the forgotten mother, but Judith, daughter of a man who saw her even from a distance. That night in the motel, I didn't sleep, but I didn't feel heavy either. I lay in the dark and thought about what it meant to finally be chosen, even if it came late, even if it came in ink and paper instead of arms. I didn't feel like getting even. I didn't feel like proving anything. I just knew one thing for sure. I never wanted to feel powerless again. So I started reading investment books, property law, basics of business structure. Not because I wanted to be rich, but because I wanted to understand the tools I had been given. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I had somewhere to go. Not a place exactly, just a direction, and that was enough. I didn't touch the money right away. It sat in accounts I barely understood managed by people I didn't know. But I wasn't ready to move, not yet. Instead, I started learning. I spent hours in the motel lobby using their old computer. I printed articles on property law and investment basics, and highlighted every sentence I didn't understand. I watched videos late into the night, took notes on rental returns, tax liens, zoning rules. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just knew I wanted to know more. There was a shift happening inside me, not loud, just steady. I was building something I hadn't had in years' certainty. Then one evening, I was scrolling listings. Not because I planned to buy anything. It had become a habit, a kind of quiet hope. That's when I saw it. A small, distressed apartment building, Portland. I clicked. My breath caught before I even saw the street name. The photo loaded slowly, but I knew the building. It was the one Ashley and Derek lived in. I recognized the peeling paint on the balcony rail, the mailbox that always tilted sideways. The listing was blunt. Owner defaulted on taxes, auction in 2 weeks. I stared at the screen without blinking. My hands went still on the keyboard. It wasn't revenge. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. Like all the noise had finally fallen away, and I could hear myself think. They had pushed me out of that building, quietly, neatly, with words that left bruises under my skin. Now here it was, half a city away from the motel, where I had rebuilt myself, falling into my lap. I closed the listing, then opened it again. I sat in the lobby until the light outside turned blue. This wasn't about proving anything to them. This was about taking something back. Not from them, but for me, for the woman they had cast aside, for the silence they left me in. The next morning I called Mr. Goldstein. We set up a shell company, ML Ventures, M for Margaret, L for Louise, my mother's name, and mine. We filed the paperwork quietly, submitted the bid carefully. No one would trace it back to me. I didn't want to be seen. I just wanted to hold the deed. We renamed the company E&J Ventures. Evelyn for my mother, Judith for me, a small name, quiet, but ours. The auction was online. I didn't go. Mr. Goldstein handled everything. 2 weeks passed like a slow breath. Then one morning he called with a single line. We got it. The building on Burnside Avenue, every unit, every lease, including theirs. He sent the deed in a plain envelope. I opened it alone in the motel room and sat with it for a long time. I didn't feel powerful. I felt steady, like the ground had finally stopped moving under me. We didn't make any announcements, no signs, no press, just business. The management company sent out updated lease terms to each tenant. Everyone received the same notice, including Ashley and Derek. Their rent tripled. Back payments were recalculated. Deadlines outlined. No threats, just policy. Just numbers printed in black ink. 3 days later, my motel phone buzzed. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. Ashley's voice sounded small, uncertain. Something weird is happening. Our rent just jumped. Derek's freaking out. Can we talk? I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Not from spite, but because silence was what I had been given. And now it was what I understood best. More messages came, one every few days. Some with her name, some without. All with the same question underneath. Do you still see me? I drove past the building once, just once. Their windows were lit. I saw movement. I saw Derek pacing. Ashley standing still. I didn't stop. I didn't knock. I let them sit with the echo they left behind. I wasn't interested in revenge. Only balance. Only gravity doing its quiet work. The intercom buzzed just before sunset. I had been making tea the same kind I used to brew when Ashley had nightmares as a little girl. Chamomile with a bit of honey. Her voice came through the speakers, soft and uneven. This is Ashley Callahan. I think my mom lives here. I paused. Watched her name flicker across the tiny screen. Then pressed the door release without a word. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a faded canvas tote, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were red, her shirt-wrinkled hair pulled back in a way that said she hadn't slept. We didn't speak at first. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked slowly like the air might shift if she moved too fast. She sat on the edge of the couch, careful not to touch anything. I poured the tea. Placed it on the coffee table without looking at her too long. The silence felt like glass between us. I don't know where to start, she said finally. Her voice cracked not from volume but from trying to stay quiet too long. Derek's angry. He blames the rent. He blames me. He blames the neighbors. He blames the dog next door. I sat across from her, not close, not far. She looked down at her hands and then away. I thought we were helping you, she said. When we asked you to leave, Derek told me you'd never go unless we pushed. And I believed him, and I hate that I did. I took a sip of tea. It was warm, steady grounding. I said nothing, not because I didn't feel something, but because words felt too small for what she had come to say. I miss you, she said, but I don't know how to fix it. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. It just hovered there, like it didn't want to land unless I made space for it. She wasn't asking for money or help. She was just trying to sit near me again. trying to find the version of me that had once made pot roast and sang along to the radio while folding laundry. I gave her what I could, not forgiveness, not comfort, just space, just stillness, the kind that speaks when words can't. When she stood to leave, she reached for my hand. I let her hold it, just for a second longer than she expected. Then she let go and walked out the door with the same tote still clutched tight. I closed the door softly behind her. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there in the hallway breathing in the silence she left behind. It was the first silence that didn't feel like punishment. I didn't keep the building. There was no announcement, no ceremony, just a quiet decision made over coffee one morning while the sky outside turned soft with spring. Mr. Goldstein handled the paperwork again. I signed my name slowly the way you do when something deserves full attention. A few weeks later, the sale closed. Half of the proceeds went to a women's shelter just outside Tacoma. We named it the Evelyn House after my mother, for women like her, like me. Women who had been silenced, then found their way back to themselves. The other half I used to buy a small house near where Daniel and I used to live. Not the old place, that belonged to the past, but close enough that the trees looked familiar and the grocery clerks still smiled like they remembered. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, light that spills through the kitchen window just right in the morning, but it's mine. I painted the living room a soft green, put a rocking chair near the window, bought a secondhand radio, and filled the bookshelf with novels I never had time to read before. There's no silence in this house that feels lonely, only the kind that lets you breathe, the kind you grow into. Ashley visits sometimes. She brings muffins she bakes from a mix. She asks about the flowers in the yard and lets her hand rest on mine longer than needed. We don't talk about Derek. We don't have to. She once asked why I sold the building. I told her I didn't want to own the place where I had been erased. I wanted to live somewhere I could exist without explanation. The days pass easy now. I walk each morning, make tea in the afternoon. I read. I write letters I never send. I listen to the world move without needing anything from me. This isn't a new beginning. It's not a second act. It's a continuation, a quiet chapter where the pages turn at their own pace. I'm not trying to prove anything anymore. I'm not asking to be seen. I already am. I survived what I wasn't meant to, but more than that, I lived it, fully, finally, and on my own terms. I used to think goodbye was something loud, a slammed door, a shouted word, a suitcase at the curb. But the goodbye that changed me came in silence. It came in a half-finished dinner, in a glance that looked past me like I wasn't there. It came in a voicemail I never returned, and in a deed with my name where no one expected to see it. Not all endings announce themselves. Some just shift the air in a room and leave you to figure out what's missing. Some aren't really endings at all, just turning points we don't recognize until we've already walked past them. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because I know what it feels like to give everything and be left with nothing but questions. And I know the quiet power of building something for yourself when no one else will. So I'll leave you with a question. What would you do if someone you loved forgot how to see you? Would you wait to be noticed? Or would you find the mirror again and remind yourself who you've always been? Coming home doesn't always mean returning to a place. Sometimes it's just remembering you still belong somewhere, even if that place is only your own heart.